All right, so we've got our full stack application set up so that our front end can successfully load data from our back end. So the next thing that we're going to do is add functionality for creating new notes. Now, the first step in this process is going to be for us to add a post endpoint to our server. So we're going to say app.post, and the path for this is going to be /notes, right? That's just a RESTful convention, is that generally creating resources is done by sending a post request to just the base resource path. Okay, so the callback now is going to look something like this. We're going to say request response, and inside here, what we're going to do is add a new note to this notes array here. And before we do that, we're going to have to decide what we want this request body to look like. Okay, now before we decide what we want the request body to look like, we are going to have to add a body parser to our application, right? Our Express server, that is, by saying app.use express.json. This is something that I almost always forget the first time around, and I'm always a little confused why my request body is showing up undefined, and then I remember, oh yeah, I forgot to add that line. So anyway, that line is needed in order for post requests in our application to have a request body inside our callback here. So now that we have that, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to say const. And since all that's needed to create a new note in our application currently is the title, what we're going to do is just include that as a property on the request body. So getting that off of the request body inside this endpoint will look like saying const title equals request.body. All right, we're using a little bit of object destructuring there to get the title. And once we've done that, we just need to add a new note here to our notes array. And the way we're going to do that is by saying notes.push. And our new note is going to look like this. It's going to have the title that was included in the request body. It's going to have an empty content when it's first created. And for the ID, we're going to have to do what we did on the front end and use the UUID package, which will generate a random unique ID for this new note. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to have to open up our front end and say npm install UUID. And that should install that package for us. So what we can do now is say, oh, actually, we don't want that on the front end. We already have it on the front end. Stop. Okay, let's go to the back end instead. We're going to say /backend. And here is where we're going to say npm install UUID and hit enter. Okay, now that should install that package into our backend. So now we can import that up at the top. Oops, let's try that again. There we go. We're going to say import v4 as UUID from UUID. Okay, and now we can use that to actually generate a new unique ID for each note that's created by saying UUID. And that's our new note. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to send back that new note in some form to our front end. Now, the simple way to do this, or the easiest way for our front end, that is to simply send back all of the notes that we've accumulated so far, including the new one that we just pushed onto this notes array. So to do that, all we need to do is say response.json notes, and that should take care of sending back the updated notes to the front end. So the next thing we're going to do now is inside our notes provider, we're going to change this create note function so that instead of just saying notes.concat blah, 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 it actually makes a request to that endpoint we just created. So what that's going to look like, we're going to say const response equals await axios.post. Okay, and before I forget, let's add async to this function here. And inside this axios.post, the path here is going to be /notes. And the response, remember, is going to contain the updated notes array. So what we need to do here is update the notes state variable to whatever we got back from the server. So for that, we're just going to say set notes to response.data. And we are going to want to catch this. So we'll just put a try catch block around it. Now, in reality, you would probably want to display some kind of message to the user if their request to create a new note wasn't successful, instead of just quietly, ignoring that error. But right now we're just going to ignore the error. You can always add some kind of little pop-up at the top of the page, letting them know that an error occurred if you want. Maybe that's something we'll take a look at later on. So we're going to say catch error. And inside of here, all we're going to do is just console log that error, whatever happened. Okay, so we're not actually doing any active error handling. We're just going to kind of ignore that for now. Now, one more thing we need to do is we need to actually send this title argument along with our post request as the request body. So to do that with Axios, we just say axios.post and include this as the second argument. This is going to be the entire request body right here that we can pick up on inside our server's endpoint here. All right, so let's test this thing out. What we're going to do, let's make sure our front end and back end are both running. You might have to restart this, but I'm just going to give it a test anyway, because why not? So let's go back to our home page here. We're going to click on add a new note. This will bring up the new note modal. And what we're going to do in here, we'll say, does this work? And now if we click on create, we should see that this new note shows up inside our list here. And if we refresh our page, we'll see that that note is still there, right? This is a first for this application because we never actually persisted our notes in local storage. We just kind of let them disappear when we refresh the application. But now that we're storing this on the back end, these notes will be persisted until our server restarts. All right, and that can be avoided as well by adding a database to our server. So that's our create endpoint. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.